Assalamu alaikum and welcome to Nafs and Therapy Season 3. Now this season is all about when Islamic knowledge and mental health meet. We're hosting Islamic scholars to bring the tradition into the conversation with our inner worlds, so that religion isn't just reduced to pressure or to performance, and that therapy is not detached from meaning. Together, we're going to explore how the Quran, ethics, and lived practice can offer us clarity, steadiness, and a more merciful way of being with ourselves on the road back to Allah. Now, a quick disclaimer. This episode is just for reflection and education. It's definitely not a substitute for personal therapy, medical care, or formal fatwa. If anything brings up something tender for you, please reach out to the right professional. And today we are joined by Dr. Samir Rashwani, who's a senior researcher and lecturer in scriptural ethics at Hamad bin Khalifa University. Together, we talk about how to approach Quranic verses, especially the ones that stir difficult emotions, with honesty, adab, and depth, and how to keep exploring the sacred book of Allah without fear or harshness towards the self. A quick disclaimer, in this episode we discuss some difficult verses and themes. Please take care of yourself as you listen, and if you feel anything tender or activating, consider pausing, reaching out to a qualified professional or a trusted scholar in your context. Okay. Assalamu alaikum.
وعليكم السلام ورحمة الله. أهلا وسهلا.
Dr. Samir, أول شيء I want to say thank you for hosting me here, and I'm very grateful to have this time together.
Thank you for your interest. It's a pleasure.
I would love for us maybe to start taking on a soft place or a introductory note. If you can tell us a bit more about your book, which is called Behind the Story, Ethical Readings of Quranic Narratives. Just take some ideas about what made you write this book, what inspired you.
Well, it was based on personal observation, which is that in pre-modern time, the interest in Quranic narratives, in Quranic stories, a kind of comparison between the pre-modern interest and the modern interest. So my observation was the pre-modern interest in Quranic stories was very minimal. The amount of books dedicated to Quranic stories are very limited in comparison with other Quranic genres.
Wow, okay.
Whereas in modern time, we have a kind of huge interest and production in this field in many aspects, from many perspectives, for various audience, like children, public, scholars, etc. A lot of discussion, a lot of debate about them. So this was the basic observation. I also was interested in ethics of the Quran, like reading the ethical discourse of the Quran, and some also modern studies. I also noticed that ethics of the Quran in pre-modern time was kind of embedded in many Quranic genres. Whereas in modern time, especially from the mid of 20th century, starting from Muhammad Abdullah Draz and Fadlur Rahman and Izotsu and others, there is like also a very growing interest in the ethics of the Quran, a kind of dedicated study trying to extract the ethics of the Quran, like moral theory, moral concepts, etc. So I said, well, okay, when I read this stuff, Quranic stories or Qasas al-Quran is not present as much as other types of discourse in the Quran. And I thought, well, okay, but this cannot be the case. Quranic narratives or Qasas al-Qurani are more than a third of the Quran, or almost a third of the Quran are Qasas. So why don't we have a kind of scholarly analysis of these Qasas in general and in specific for their moral import, for their the ethics of these stories? What do they tell us? I'm not saying that this was like absent, but it is like
Sideline.
Yeah, sidelined, embedded in many genres, Quranic studies and beyond that. So this was the basic.
And when you say pre-modern times, can you like help us know like what era are we?
Before 19th century, basically.
I see. And yeah, we're trying to understand as well. I'm not sure if we're going to go to this conversation, but I personally love the stories of the prophets and the Quran. And I think that they support us a lot in understanding whether trials or different elements. But if you can help us understand how the way we interpret, and we as in like Muslims who are not scholars, interpret the Quran, how that shapes the way we maybe become, maybe our character, maybe even the way we interpret the Quran responsibly Like, do you have in mind like a guide for us or an idea? How can we do that in a way that's meaningful and at the same time we're not scholars?
So, well, so interpret is kind of a heavy word. Like interpret is like refers us to kind of the scholarly enterprise. And I don't think this is what you mean. I think you understand.
Yes.
Right? So understand, it's you understand for yourself. And yeah, for me to talk about this is, yeah, it's not easy, but I will try to say, well, one of the basic, I teach students scriptural ethics of the Quran and Sunnah, and most of my students are like specialists. They don't have background in Islamic studies, so I try to relate them with the Quran. And one of the early tips that I give to them is don't pick verses. Pick and choose verses randomly. But when you read a verse, you need to read it in context. And context here refers to several aspects. Context in the passage that you are reading. Try to read verses before and verses after. If you are still not clear about what does this verse mean, maybe you need to read the whole surah. And reading the whole surah with this specific verse in mind, how this, when I read the whole surah, how this will help me understand this specific verse. And sometimes this is also not enough. Sometimes you need to look for other verses, similar verses in the Quran, right, in order to understand the whole Quranic discourse about it, right? So
Yeah, right. So reading before, reading after, not picking and choosing. Do you have in mind, like, is there a certain verse that you notice a lot of people like stick on, like, oh, this is difficult for me to understand or to accept or to read?
there are a lot, I mean, including myself. There are a lot of verses that I don't think I understand. Some of them I try to do research and look for and form a kind of basic understanding, let's say, a kind of hypothetical or hypothesis. Well, I think this verse means or works in this direction. This applies to many issues, and for people, I think this is the same. Well, the Quran is, of course, the divine word of God. It's a divine word. It's divine discourse. And this is, it's not just one aspect of the Quran, it's the major aspect of the Quran, which means the Quran, when we read it, it works unto us in different ways, in unexpected ways, sometimes in mystic ways. So sometimes when I read the Quran, I read specific verses or surahs, I go through without to stop to wonder or to say why this is so, without feeling any curiosity.
Yeah.
And sometimes the same passage or the same verse, I feel, well, what does this really mean? Lately, I was reading the story of Musa alayhi salam, and I read this verse to take Musa under his custody. Here we have the divine voice is telling us, وَأَلْقَيْتُ عَلَيْكَ. So God is addressing Musa. So literally to be made under my eyes. And this is, first of all, in Arabic, very romantic, sensitive statement. Sensitive in the sense it touches the heart. I was reading it before without stopping. I mean, I feel, well, I understand it. But when I stop, okay, what is this? Why don't I hear this phrase often when I read other genres, whatever, in our tradition? This is not oft repeated expression, whereas it's very interesting, very meaningful when I like sit back and wondered on it. So, okay, لتصنع على عيني. So you will be made under my eyes, under my observation, under my care, and this kind of تصنع production. It seems that God, of course, the divine voice is telling Musa that you are made, you are designed according to my plan, under my eye, under my care and love, etc. I think this is very important, very interesting, taking into account that this Musa alayhi salam was a child who was thrown into river. You understand? Because we read this a lot, sometimes we don't present or we don't try to recall this kind of experience, a mother throwing a child into the river and by the divine order, right? So it's kind of the divine voice is telling him, well, look, this is not something random. This is not divine wrath or divine negligence. It's exactly the opposite. It's divine plan, very designed. we created you and designed your path until you became a prophet. So this kind of experience that me myself is facing all the time in many verses.
And do you think he heard this verse while or are these verses more of God telling us what he told Musa in the moment? Or is this after, or we don't know timelines?
Well, sometimes timelines are not important or not at all important.
Was he comforted during the process?
We don't know. It's not clear.
Right.
This is present in many Quranic stories. When you read, let's say, Surah Yusuf, alayhi salam, the story, you will find divine voice is intervening here and there. Sometimes the divine voice is addressing Yusuf, sometimes addressing us, sometimes addressing the non-believers, etc., etc. So how this happened in time, this is not important at all. And we cannot reach to the point to understand this.
Right. Because I always wondered when Rabbil Alameen talks to the prophets that if it's, because I don't, for me, it's, I feel like it's really nice to be comforted while you're in the crisis, while Sayyidina Ibrahim was in the fire, while Sayyidina Yusuf was in the well. But as you said, we probably can't know if this was happening during, or maybe they know it in the hearts. They're prophets at the end of the day. They're not like us.
Well, because I was not trained, I used to try to, I would say, when I'm reading the Quranic stories, I'm trying not to equate them with history, with events that happening chronologically. So sometimes it's just a kind of divine reflection on the story, put as kind of voice addressing Musa or addressing the Prophet Muhammad or anyone, right? So I don't take this literally. Maybe it's there. It was there sometime in the life of Musa. I don't know which, when, no idea. Maybe not.
Right.
Maybe it's just telling us, look at the divine plan, how perfect, how, let's say, at this specific story, divine love, divine care, divine design for the rescue of humanity, right?
Right. That's an important point, maybe, to not focus on, not necessarily focus, but to not fixate on certain, how did this happen and when, and which brings me to a question that I just thought about as we're talking right now. And I often hear people being confused of, if the Quran came in a context and at a certain time, then how can we apply it to our times now when it's different, it's no longer in century Arabia, and they often need this kind of confirmation or that it still applies even if we're today in the 20th century.
Well, this is the power of the Quran. First of all, as I told you before, it's the divine voice, the divine word. And this is alone has its effects on us. Well, our life is not just the circumstances that we are facing, right? An important part is how this Quran is not just informing us what to do, what not to do, but how it transforms us to be something. To state hal or station maqam in the language of the Sufis, right? So what to be, it's not what to do. There are different approaches to the Quran. So you will find people who are just looking for what to do, the wajibat, muharramat, what's forbidden. That's fine, but that's not everything. There is much more space for our domains that the Quran is addressing. And one important one, the most important one from my perspective, is addressing us. The Quran is addressing us as a human being. The ontology, what to do, what not to do, is really very, very thin. It's less than, I don't know, 3% of the Quran or something like this. The sense of ahkam, right? Of rulings. Of course, if we talk about ethics, honesty, etc., that's huge. That's a huge part of the Quran. In this sense, yeah, the Quran is an eternal word of God because we humans, we are not changing.
Right.
We are the same. Whatever. I don't think we will change. However, we became progressive, technologically advanced. But as a human being, with our feelings, with our reactions, all things that you are expert in this know, they will stay the same feeling, similar. And in this sense, let's say the majority of the Quran is fulfilling, addressing these aspects. So I don't think time is relevant.
Lovely answer. As you said, feelings, and I just remembered how in stories such as the story of Sayyidina Musa, there was an emphasis on fear. where there's when he wanted to go and speak to the Pharaoh, there was some sort of fear, and he wanted to pray to, that Rabb al-Alamin would send him with his brother with him. Or in other stories as well, there are emotions that we learn from the prophets or in the Sunnah of Rasulullah ﷺ. And I'm wondering if you touched on these, whether you personally, about the feelings that the prophets engage in and how that plays a role in their prophecy.
Well, one of the early surahs of the Quran, the revealed surahs, is Surah Al-Muzammil. And in that surah, the Quran is described as a weighty word, قولا ثقيلا. So the Quran is difficult. It's hard. Even for the Prophet, who is a special human being, right? So we should accept that. It's not a novel or a normal book. A book is not a good translation for kitab. So it's قولا ثقيلا, and this is in the beginning of revelation, maybe the first year or first months of the revelation. Yeah, after that, the Quran, God is telling the Prophet ﷺ to take specific kind of course in order to afford or to be able to handle the Quran. So وَرَتِّلِ الْقُرْآنَ تَرْتِيلًا. And tartila is not recitation. This is something else. Something that will enable the Prophet to understand, to withhold with the Quran. So we should accept this. This is first one. Another one, in the Quran, we have another verse, which is الله نزل أحسن الحديث كتابا متشابها مثانية تقشعر من, whereat shiver the skins of those who fear their Lord. Then their skins and their heart soften to the remembrance of God. God is kind of explaining this to us. Well, that's normal, and that's something apparently good. So we should feel this kind of shiver, this kind of fear. And yeah, modern scholars usually avoid talking about fear, but apparently in the Quran, fear is important. I cannot explain this in psychological terms. Maybe you can do that better than me, but it's kind of, well, تَقْشَعِرُّ ثُمَّ تَلِينُ, so shiver, then soften. I think this is the believer's path, right? And this is not once. This is not one event. This should be always the case. Of course, we are reading the Quran sometimes. I think you also, as a psychologist, you know that better, that our span of attention is limited, right? I don't know, minutes or hours or minutes maybe. And so when I read the Quran, I cannot be 100% attentive all the time when I'm reading it. Nobody can, I think. And that's why in Surah Al-Muzammil itself, the last verse, where we have فَقْرَأُوا مَا تَيَسَّرَ مِنْهُ or فَقْرَأُوا مَا تَيَسَّرَ مِنَ الْقُرْآنِ, which means you shouldn't read. It's not a must that you should read all the Quran or the whole of the Quran, right? So, and we have also that authentic hadith where it was said in the Sahaba radwanullah alayhim, so the companions were not, I would say, jumping over 10 verses before they understand them, apply them, absorb them, then they move to next 10 verses, etc. etc. Yeah, the Quran is heavy, is loaded, and of course, we shouldn't be attentive all the time.
Yeah.
We can just recite it, and it will work into us, will influence us in mystical ways. But sometimes when also we concentrate, we focus our attention on specific verses, and once of a sudden we feel this kind of qash'arira, right? تقشعر قلوبهم, shiver. And then when we read, we kind of relax again.
Right. Yeah, I relate to this experience. I wanted to maybe touch on maybe your experience, not, we can say as a scholar as well. When you read, for example, verses that are about punishment or about some difficulties, how do you relate to them? How do you make hikir? And you're smiling.
Well, there are verses that are like harsh, difficult. I don't feel, how to say, well, let me say it in a different way. Well, anger might be kind of immune or one of the aspects of love. So when you love, I mean, we love our kids, right? So much that if we are sure that they are going to fall off a mountain or like high place, we will scream in fearful way, right? Yeah. We might hit them just to save them, right? This is how I think about such verses. I think it's like it's emanating from a loving God who is so keen, caring for his creatures and wants them to survive. That's why we have this like, yeah, going back to the theme of fear or sadness. This also reminded me of another hadith where the Prophet ﷺ, dealing with the Quran is part of, it's of course ritual, right? So when we read the Quran is itself reading, just reciting is ritual. But understanding or using the Quran for specific reasons is something that part of our dua. So we have dua in one of the hadith, Allahumma. It's not all about just sit, read, try to understand the semantics of the words, the structure of the verse. This is not enough, will not be enough at all. There's something ambiguous, there's something hidden. That's why we ask God for help in order to sometimes to remove our sadness, to cure our wounds, psychological wounds, let's say.
And do you often recommend that people read the Quran with a teacher, especially if they're maybe just coming into Islam, or even if they were Muslims and they haven't read it? Or do you think it can be a journey of self-discovery?
There is no one answer for this because people are different. It depends on the educational background of the one I'm talking to, right? So, which language he's capable of reading? Does he read Arabic or not? This is all the circumstances that I need to take into account to give an answer for this. So, for someone who has no Arabic, who has no good educational background or proper educational background, I would say yes, you need maybe to find a mentor who you trust, to read the Quran with him or to hear the Quran from him or the explanation of the Quran. For others, for those like with good educational background who knows a little bit of Arabic or they can navigate through some academic, let's say tafasir, exegesis or commentaries or stuff, yeah, maybe they don't need to do that. They can, do that themselves.
So maybe you can talk a bit about, which is one of the tough questions that I had for us for this episode. And these are the verses about women, where sometimes when they reach a certain verse and they read it, they feel a bit hurt, or they might feel a bit that this is unfair or tough. And I mean, there are different interpretations to verses, but what do you think, if you can guide us, especially the females, when we were reading the Quran, without saying khalas, this is what Islam says, and hukm كأنه.
Well, yeah, this is an interesting question and always debated one. Well, the easiest one of the ways the first step to handle this is not to take one verse and just focus onto it, the verse about beating wives or women. You need to read the whole context. And the whole context means the context in that surah, Surah An-Nisa, and also other verses related to women, whether it's women or wives. And when we do that, we will have a different picture. So we cannot delve into this because this is complex. But just one example, when we talk about nushuz as a reason for beating wives, when we read the whole surah, we will understand that nushuz is not just the act of wives, but also the act of husbands as well. So there is nushuz for wives and there is nushuz for husbands. So yeah, of course, how we handle both cases is different for various reasons. But first of all, we have a holistic overview of the Quran. So moving from this, just for the sake of time, Imam al-Maturidi in his tafsir, he handles this. First of all, before this, our uneasiness with dealing with such verses is not something new. Apparently, we have narrations from the time of the Prophet and from later times. Muslims, were discussing about these verses, problematizing such verses. Even the Prophet ﷺ, we have hadith, God wanted something, I wanted something, and God wanted something else. And the prophetic, let's say, embodiment is different from this literal meaning, literal understanding of beating wives. Okay, because the Prophet, we have this authentic hadith from Aisha radiallahu anha that the Prophet ﷺ didn't beat anyone in his life, neither woman, slave, or any person. So it's kind of against the prophetic model, beating, the issue of beating. But apart from this, Imam al-Maturidi in his tafsir, he gives us a kind of, let's say, hermeneutic schema to follow. He says, well, when we read the Quran, when we read the Quranic discourse about the relationship between men and women, we find that there are foundational values, which is مودة ورحمة لتسكنوا إليها. So مودة ورحمة وسكينة. Love, mercy, sakina, to feel safe. And he said, well, okay, then we have this verse about beating wives. So how can we reconcile between these? He said, we don't need to reconcile. We should just understand this specific single verse according to these values, governing values. How to do that? He said, well, first, for example, this is just an example. For example, one way to understand it is that this is to save marriage. So all these like procedure should be done in order to save marriage, in order to preserve these values. Whenever these actions, three actions, exceed or contradict these moral values, we are not allowed to do them. Which means, according to him, the whole verse was talking about a kind of similar to what I told you before. There's like an extreme case where specific action, in this case of a wife, would lead to something very, let's say, haram, forbidden, or dangerous. And the only solution was at that time maybe just to take it away from that danger, to save marriage, of course, they are talking about what we call it, doing something bad. So, and even this, the husband should be sure that this kind of tiny beating, they talk about very, very light beating, it's just kind of awakening. And even this should be done under the condition that this will not conflict or contradict the value of love, mercy, and sakina. So just in this case, I don't know, let's say the wife is kind of drunk, that happens sometimes, and she's like eating a child, and the child might be hurt or something. Some kind of not normal cases. According to his interpretations, the whole verse is talking about kind of nushuz, like not normal cases where sometimes under many conditions, beating and this light beating is the only solution just to save someone else or even the wife it's herself.
Yeah, I know this is definitely not an easy verse to either explain or discuss or just have, and I'm glad that we're just bringing this in, because a part of our responsibility is to talk about this, not just say, oh my god, this is a verse I don't feel good about and I just want to leave everything. Our feelings are there, but as well we need to, as you said, understand and read and be mindful of what are the whole circumstances before we judge. And it's put a lot of responsibility on the man as well, to be able to make sure that he's following the rules of rahma and sakina and be very careful of what he can choose to do.
That's why the Prophet ﷺ, when there was a long story, but the Prophet, after the revelation of this verse, told the Sahaba, the most virtuous of you will not beat their wife. So for normal persons, let's say normal Muslims who are not able to read the Quran fluently or understand it or stuff, they just take the prophetic model, right? Okay, well, you see this verse, you are not comfortable with it. Look what the Prophet did. I mean, the prophetic model is the most important one. The Prophet should understood this verse, and according to his model, he never did that. So this was not a solution for him. Then just follow him. Why do we need to, I'm talking for this like lay person, don't delve into this, just follow the Prophet. And we have in the Quran, in Surah Al-Imran, the verse about al-muhkam wal-mutashabih, al-muhkamat wal-mutashabihat, where at the end, the answer is وَأَمَّا الَّذِينَ. So the idea is that those who believe, who will say, well, God knows the best, right? So we kind of differ the interpretation or the final word to God. We don't need to delve into this. And as a human, as a normal Muslim, I will just follow the prophetic model, which is like not problematic in this case.
Lovely. I like this kind of, if you're not able to do a PhD thesis about this, just follow at least what the prophetic model tells us. As we're ending our time, I would love to end about a core idea behind your book, where you're trying to show the stories in the Quran as ethical formation, I think, at the same time. So if you can just share with us how these, whether the prophetic stories, how they can train the reader's mind to maybe have a lens about whether ethics, whether some message that you also wanted to deliver from the prophetic stories.
Well, when we talk about Quranic narratives or stories, these are not just prophetic.
Oh, yeah.
So in my chapter, I studied the story of the two sons of Adam, who were not prophets, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So these two persons, like Habil and Qabil, the famous name, they are not prophets. So, but an important verse, an important short story in the Quran. Quranic narratives are space where you have what's called in literature typologies, or let's say moral types, moral models that you follow. And you have a lot. When you read these stories of the prophets and otherwise, you will find almost all kind of personalities, all kind of difficulties, of trials that those prophets or other personalities went through and how they handled this stuff. So you will find a father who lost his son, a prophet who lost his son, a son who lost his father, in that case, whose father didn't believe him or refused or wanted to kill him as well. The father of Ibrahim, alayhi salam, who want to throw him also with his people into in fire. Look at this case. Another case, a prophet who was virtuous, salih, everything, and at the end he had this vicious illness, right? Ayub alayhi salam, right? And where everybody left him. He was alone, single alone, just with his wife, who took care of him. What Musa alayhi salam, who were thrown into river. Sayyidina Yusuf this is also a whole story. One who he was child thrown into well, and the whole story is full of drama, of trials, of problems, of issues. So that's why I say, well, each one of us will identify himself or herself with some of these personalities, because there are a lot of and of course we have also like the female models, the wife of Pharaoh, and the wife of Noah, and other stories, and yeah, there are a lot. What I want to say is that as a Muslim, as a human being, when I read these stories, I will identify myself with some of these personalities in various times, with various personalities in various times. So when I'm sick, I will remember Ayub. When I have kind of a trail with problems, I will remember Ibrahim or Sayyidina Muhammad alayhi salatu wasalam. I mean, when one of the chapters was talking about the disability. So Musa alayhi salam, he has kind of disability. This his uqdat al-lisan, right? The speech. So he's not fluent. Well, this is not bad, even for a prophet whose the first duty is to proclaim, is to tell, is to recite and to speak. Even for this, there was a solution. We will support you through your brother. And just for that, maybe, if Musa alayhi salam was fluent, Harun might not be a prophet. So, apparently Harun became prophet just to support Musa alayhi salam. Wallahu a'lam. So, in the sense that I don't think in the Quran, there is no problem without remedy. There is no fear without hope. There is no pain without relief. Yeah, so when we look at these Quranic stories from this perspective, I think it will transform us to embody, to understand ourselves, to find solace in our life, and also to take example how they reacted to this stuff and how they also did wrong. So all prophets, most of the prophetic stories, you will find the prophets are doing something wrong, and God is kind of sometimes blaming them, sometimes correcting them, directing them to the right direction. So that's normal. I mean, they are prophet, but they are very much like us. I think this is important because the popular discourse is more of kind of dichotomy, right? So you have the sphere of prophets who are like high, who are very far from us. Yeah, somebody would say, well, but I'm not prophet, I'm not Musa. No, you shouldn't be, of course, Musa or Dawood or anyone, but they are not that much different from us. The Quran is addressing them, is talking with them, is solving their problems like all of us. So if we put them on different sphere, different level, we are kind of disregarding third of the Quran. This is one issue in the kind of popular way of reading the Quran. Another one is reading these stories as history. as a story, with the beginning, with the end, with the chronological order of the events. I don't think this is useful at all. And this is not in the Quran.
How should we read it?
Just as it is in the Quran, as what they call it scenes. Right? So you have different scenes, like narratives with different scenes. And you know that the Quran stories are repetitive. They are repeating the Quran in different ways. The same scene you will find the director is entering from a different door. Right? Which is unique in the Quran. We don't find that much in the Bible. And I think this is for a reason, right? So if you are telling stories, histories of the prophets, you don't need that. You just tell them the story of Yusuf alayhi salam. This is like the stages of his life, and right? But this is not in the Quran. Just Surah Yusuf is the exceptional one. All other stories were oft repeated in the Quran and in different ways, in different perspectives. So just forget about historicity of these stories, and also don't make a cliff or wall between you as a lay person, lay Muslim, and the prophets alayhi salatu wasalam, as kind of ideal persons who are like far inaccessible to us. I don't think this is useful or like productive in any spiritual or
Lovely.
way.
I think you just answered my last question as well, which was if you would leave the readers with maybe some steps that they could do when they're reading or when they're engaging with the Quran. And I think this is a really good as well note to leave at of the ways that we should engage with it, not just as a book and I'm just reading it more to have an embodiment and engagement with it. Any other practical step that comes to your mind about this?
Well, if you are an English speaker who don't know Arabic, I would suggest, well, when you read English translation, this is an interpretation already. Okay. So you are not reading the Quran, you are reading an interpretation, a tafsir of the Quran. So if you want to go deeper or you have questions, then you need to consult several translations. If still you have like questions, doubts, problems, then maybe you need to consult a commentary. Right? There are in English some useful tools to do that might help. So this is for the English speaker or those who don't read Arabic. If you are able to read Arabic, then maybe you need to also to consult some tafasir, some mukhtasarat, abridged tafasir that may give you kind of spectrum of interpretations. The most important issue when we are reading the Quran, we need to understand that it is what's called in our language polyvalent text, which means it is text with many meanings, many possible meanings. There is no only one correct understanding, or at least it's inaccessible to us. Nobody can say for sure that this understanding is the only correct understanding of this verse. This is almost non-existent. So we should accept the plurality of interpretations as our classical scholars did. Whenever you open any classical tafsir, 99% of them, you will not find a mufassir, an exegete who will just mention one interpretation for one verse. You will find there's 3 opinions. One is A, second is B, etc. And my inclination, my reflection is maybe the second is the most close to the verse, or I have another suggestion, which is XY. So there was an acceptance, respect for the diversity of opinions that reflects that the Quran itself is rich, because it's the word of God that addresses human being from the time of revelation until the end of the time. Nobody can claim the exclusive correct reading of it at all.
Wow, this is important. SubhanAllah. Wow. I think we're leaving off maybe the listeners with a lot to think about and a lot to consider, inshallah. And thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it.